Accessibility in presentations. We are on video 2 of my series about this topic. And we started this series because a lot of people ask me, hey Echo, how do I balance creating a visually engaging presentation with creating an accessible one? And that's the question we're focusing on right now. If you have not watched part 1, please go back and watch that first because we are picking up where we left off last time. So first, let me welcome you back to More Than PowerPoint, my YouTube channel. I'm Dr. Echo Rivera, and I help academics and researchers and those who went the non-academic path learn how to create visually engaging, accessible presentations. Just as a reminder, I am breaking this topic up into multiple videos. I know that everyone wants a 10-minute video that explains everything, but that is just not possible for something that requires nuance, like accessibility in presentations. So that is why this is a series. And as a reminder, I'll only be talking about accessibility in slide presentations because that's my specialty. That's what I help with. It's the focus of my online professional development program, the Presentation Skills Masterclass series. And I've been helping people create both more visually engaging and more accessible presentations in my training program for years. And it's a common question that comes up, which is why I wanted to put this series out there on YouTube. And right now we are in part 2 of picking apart these big assumptions embedded in that original question of balance. We're tackling this myth that visually engaging is on one side, accessibility is on the other, and that the goal is balancing the two. And this question really only comes up when people are trying to reduce the text on their slides and they're trying to move away from the status quo. They worry that by using less text and more visual, they're going to have less accessibility, which means they're equating text-heavy status quo presentations with accessibility. But if you watched part 1, you started seeing that assumption get unraveled right before your eyes. We went through how status quo slide designs are inaccessible for people who have vision disabilities, who are deaf or hard of hearing, have trouble with thinking, remembering, or learning, and even those who are struggling with some mental health. So that was the clear message of part 1. And I mostly based those examples on my years of experience as a professional development provider for academic and research presentations. I've done a lot of research. I have a lot of practical experience with doing this. And I've heard from a lot of people across multiple contexts and presentations how accessible they find my presentations. And sometimes that it was the first time they had ever seen an accessible presentation. That's why I became a professional development provider for this. And I've had my training participants come back and say that they're now hearing the same things. So that's what I really included in the first video. But I understand that you might want a little bit more than that. So I promised to do that. So let's go ahead and dive into something that I think really sums up most of the best evidence that the status quo is highly inaccessible. So what evidence do I have beyond my years of being a presentation trainer and hearing that type of feedback from people who take my training? Well, I'd like to introduce you or remind you about Universal Design in Learning, or UDL. It is a fantastic evidence-based approach to guiding teachers and instructors on how to create classrooms that are accessible. And I'll paste this website below because, oh my goodness, they have tons of guides and resources, and it's based on research. Now, there are 3 broad categories of UDL: engagement, representation, and then action and expression. And I've spent a lot of time looking through this website and reading about UDL, and you should too. It is fantastic. And they explain a lot of different things in very professional ways with data and professional examples. My unprofessional takeaway from all of this is that they're basically spending this whole time being like, you know what? If you want to be accessible, just stop being so boring. Like, just stop accepting the status quo. OMG. Okay. That's just me. But for example, here is a super helpful page from Syracuse University about accessible design for classrooms. And they talk about UDL. And I loved the very professional, very academic way where they talk about this for the engagement category. They said, recognizing that students aren't able to automatically activate their interest or motivation, look for multiple ways to get students mentally and physically involved in the activity. Wow. Isn't that a very nice, professional, and academic way of saying, don't be boring? I love it. I love it. And again, so UDL is mostly about classrooms, but I encourage all of my training participants to apply this thinking outside the classroom. If you apply this approach, this mindset to every presentation you give, even when it's a conference presentation or evaluation results or to stakeholders or policymakers or whoever, you will create presentations that are accessible and that everyone loves. And remember how I was all like rude and aggressive and said it's important for you to seek evidence too? Well, I did that here, and I couldn't find anywhere in the guidelines where it said slides with walls of text that overwhelm people are accessible. Keep doing that. So that's why I say my reading of UDL is that it does not support the excuse of, well, it's boring but accessible. In fact, what you will see is that they suggest that you use visual aids multiple times. Ooh, but we'll talk about that in another video. So again, for a while, I was really stuck here with like, okay, how can anybody think this is true? And not in a mean or condescending way. My PhD is in psychology, so it was very much in like, how do I understand where people are coming from so I can respond better, right? Like taking responsibility for that. Like, how can I explain this better? Because again, it's like the status quo is so obviously terrible. I mean, everyone complains about how boring presentations and lectures are. That's why the phrase death by PowerPoint exists. So we all hate it. And we even have awesome frameworks like universal design in learning and more, which very much encourages us to create more engaging learning experiences. I mean, they're literally like, be engaging. And nowhere that I could find does it say, keep doing status quo, boring walls of text for your presentation slides. So what gives? How is this happening? And then I finally realized what the issue was, at least in some cases. I realized that people were saying out loud, yeah, it's boring, but at least it's accessible. But what they were actually referring to was, yeah, it's boring, but at least it's something that can be read by a screen reader. So that is often what people mean when they say this. And once I figured that out, I was like, okay, now we can break that down because I see where people are coming from here. Because how is something accessible if people can't even literally get the information? Totally legit. Except the first thing I want to say is, okay, but what about all the other disabilities? Do they not matter anymore? Accessibility is supposed to include everyone, and it's inaccurate to equate accessibility with just one disability. And vision disabilities are more than just blindness. So it's like not even a full range of examples within one disability category, right? So don't say accessible if you specifically mean screen reader friendly. Those two words cannot be equated. And beyond that, we have just learned that boring is actually inaccessible. So when accessibility is equated with screen readers, then what is actually being said here is this. Yeah, it's inaccessible, but at least it can be read out loud by a computer voice. I gotta say, I don't really find that to be a convincing argument. I don't know about you. So let's break this down even more using the examples that I showed you of how the status quo is inaccessible. So yeah, a computer speaks the wall of text slides. Okay, cool. But to me, that seems like it would just be a droning list of words smashed together. Like, I imagine it feels like an instruction manual, just like being read. Like, that doesn't sound fun or engaging. And again, because the talk or lecture or workshop, whatever, was not scripted and storyboarded effectively, it's probably kind of a hot mess. It's disorganized, confusing, just a data dump. And you don't even get to hear it in the presenter's pace or in their voice with their inflections, which are actually really helpful and can sometimes compensate a little bit for some of these other problems. But they don't get that because it's a screen reader doing it. And again, knowing about some of these other bad habits, we know that the screen reader can't repeat the random stuff thrown in, those unscripted tangents. Or it's reading information that was crammed onto the slides, but were skipped over in the real presentation, meaning that it wasn't important enough to cover, I guess. Either way, that's like an extra burden on them, extra stuff, extra information that they have to sift through because they're using that screen reader. And then finally, because the handout is that kind of useless one, or maybe there isn't even a handout to begin with, that means that pretty much that screen reader is the only thing that they can use. And so they kind of have to like repeat this whole experience just to try to get to the information they need. You know, I don't know, just thinking about it, I just feel like that sounds like a very bad user experience, especially if that presentation is the status quo. And then what about the whole reality that people can have multiple disabilities? Like, what happens if they are blind and have another disability, like a learning disability? So, okay, you've made something that their screen reader can speak out loud, but you've also made something totally inaccessible for anyone with a learning disability. So what are they supposed to do if they have both? Like, split their brain in half and turn off the learning disability for a moment? No, that's not a thing. So it's really important, especially if you're trying to equate accessibility with it can be read by a screen reader, to remember that people can have multiple disabilities. And I'm not even done yet because there's another angle that people take with this. So in my training, one of the very first things that you learn is to stop using default templates with pre-existing random designs all over the slides. It is like a basic first step. And when people hear this, oh my goodness, they make all kinds of additional assumptions like, nope, I am keeping my template echo because a template is accessible. It's already 508 compliant or ADA compliant or whatever. I hear this a lot, but it does not make sense for most disabilities. Again, this usually means people are taking that extremely narrow view and equating the word accessible with screen readers. And then worse, going that extra step and equating template with screen reader friendly. Yikes, that is a big risk to take. Because here's the thing that I've realized most people who say this don't know, but just creating a template once does not mean it will automatically and always work for a screen reader. I have seen tons of accessibility websites say, here's our template, use this, and it can be read by a screen reader. And then that's kind of it. So I totally see why people might think it's screen reader friendly because they just used that template. But here's where the risk comes in. That is assuming zero human error when designing the slides. Zero human error. That's probably the funniest thing I'll ever say. Like, when does that happen? Zero human error. Like, if someone adds one thing extra or accidentally deletes a placeholder and replaces it with a text box, or they manually change the design, that can actually mess things up. Plus, every time you add an image or an object, the presenter has to go in and specify the alt text or whether it's decoration. Like, the template doesn't know that. So no human error. That's just not how things work. PowerPoint has an amazing support page that walks you through all of this. So you should not be assuming that a template you give people or were given will just automatically be read by a screen reader accurately. And you should really not be assuming that it stays that way as it gets edited over and over and over again. Everyone who uses that template should familiarize themselves with the many steps involved in making a final PowerPoint presentation screen reader ready. A lot of people do know about alt text or alternative text. They know that's a thing, and that is fantastic. That's a huge step in the right direction. But they don't even know things like, even PowerPoint says you should avoid tables in your slides. Yet the status quo involves lots of tables of data. So that's another example of human error messing up the accessibility of a template. People also rarely know about things like links and setting up the reading order within a slide, saving in different formats, and that there is a test for screen reader readiness in PowerPoint. So I encourage you, if you thought a recent presentation you gave was something a screen reader could use, go and get evidence. Go and do that test to be sure. Now, in full disclosure, I have not actually used this testing feature, and it is possible it still isn't as accurate as it needs to be, but my point still stands. Just because someone told you a template is accessible and screen reader friendly does not mean it's true. You have to actively be on top of your game when using it. You need to do things to finalize it, and you have to seek out proof that it does work with a screen reader. Only then can you know for sure. And beyond that, I really want you to separate template from accessibility. These are not tied together. Those are not interchangeable words. Going back to this PowerPoint page, you'll see that nowhere does PowerPoint say, it is important to note that if our app recognizes you've made a visually engaging presentation, PowerPoint will disable all screen reader features, okay? That's not a thing. That's not a problem. People always ask me why I hate Canva so much and why I recommend PowerPoint. Well, this is one of those many reasons. PowerPoint is a powerful, amazing app, and it has features that will let you turn your visually engaging presentation into something that is screen reader friendly. Like, you get to do that. And likewise, as far as I know, I could not find anywhere on this page where PowerPoint said the only way you can make a presentation accessible to someone who is blind is by making it screen reader friendly. It's possible that I missed it, but I don't think that's there. And I think that's because having a PowerPoint file be screen reader friendly is not always or necessarily the best accessibility or accommodation option. My personal opinion is that it's actually one of the least accessible options in this range of making a presentation work for someone who is blind. And there are other options for making it accessible or doing accommodations, including things like alternative audio tracks, where I think in a lot of cases, in combination with some of the other strategies, that would actually be way better than a screen reader option for the audience member. And it seems easier for the presenter too, someone who is overworked and already has a million responsibilities. But more on that in another video, because I want to be able to fully explain why that's a case with examples and all that good stuff. I'm only saying this now because I know some people are going to get stuck here and hyper focus on screen readers. So I want to plant that seed that there are other options, especially if you start creating visually engaging presentations. Like, more options are going to open up to you. And I personally think that those options might actually be just as good, if not better, in some cases. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and move on. Okay, but to kind of keep going with this theme, while you're here checking out this page, because you're going to, right? You're going to go check this out. I hope so. You will also see that PowerPoint even has some tips and best practices for accessibility. Be sure to check them out and notice that literally none of them say, keep your presentation boring, or make sure you use lots and lots of text. Walls of text are awesome. No, because even PowerPoint knows that wouldn't be accessible. Death by PowerPoint is not actually PowerPoint's fault. Hey, it's Echo here, just popping in to say, if you are realizing that your presentations could be better in terms of accessibility, then definitely check out my professional development program, the Presentation Skills Masterclass series. I don't shove accessibility into just one small video at the end. It's not an afterthought. Accessibility is embedded in all of the strategies that I teach. So as you're learning how to create more visually engaging, effective presentations, you will also be improving the accessibility of your presentations. So if you are interested, the link to learn more is below, and I hope you enroll, and I hope I see you in the program. All right, let's continue with the video. Okay, hopefully you see all the flaws with this and you're like, OMG Echo, okay, I get it. Are you done? Oh no, I'm not done, because there is another thing that people mean when they say this, and I have to address that too. So if someone has said this, yeah, it's boring, but at least it's accessible, but they weren't referring to screen readers, then what they were probably trying to say is, yeah, it's boring, but at least it's something that can be read by anyone. As in, it's accessible for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, or hey, maybe their first language is different than the speakers, and that's when it could be helpful. Or it's helpful for a specific learning disability. Either way, what they're thinking is that having the speaker notes on the slide is a good thing for whatever reason, right? Oh boy. Let's translate that now that we know better, and now that we know boring is inaccessible. So that's like saying, yeah, it's inaccessible and everyone will hate it in real time and feel like they should have just stayed home. But hey, at least they can just read the whole presentation later. Yikes. Clearly, that's not what we want, and that does not sound accessible. Maybe that sounds harsh, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be a jerk here. I just know that making a presentation where the script is on the slides and the speaker just reads it to people or expects people to read it themselves during the presentation is pretty much the definition of death by PowerPoint. I know I'm saying that a lot in this video, but it kind of fits the theme. Everyone hates it. Everyone tunes out the speaker and then just starts reading it, or maybe they read it on their own later. It is the #1 most hated pet peeve of academic and professional presentations. So it is not acceptable to do this under the guise of accessibility. I think a big problem is that people forget sometimes a presentation is a specific communication method. Words mean something, and there should be a point to attending your talk or lecture in real time, or watching the video from start to finish. Like, that's why you make it, to have your audience travel through the story with you as you walk them through it, hopefully in an engaging way. But either way, you do it with your pacing, your tone, your inflection, your facial expressions. That's part of the presentation. It's part of the communication method. So if all you're going to do is write a script, slap it on the slides, and read it to people, let's be real, that's just a waste of everyone's time. There's no reason for them to be there. You might as well just write your script in Word or Google Docs, send it to people in advance, and save everyone the trouble of having to put on pants or drag themselves onto Zoom. So yeah, even at its most specific, where it's being tailored to like 1 to 2 very specific, narrow needs or disabilities, it is still not acceptable to create boring, text-heavy slides under the guise of accessibility. So back to our assumption. The assumption that the status quo text-heavy presentation style is currently accessible. Well, I really hope after all this time that you are fully convinced this could not be further from the truth. And that means we cannot equate accessibility with text-heavy in this visual model we have here of the seesaw. And that in fact, it's the text-heavy status quo presentations that are the opposite of accessibility. So if you're going to balance anything, what you balance is text-heavy status quo with having to improve your presentation's accessibility. Now, unfortunately, from what I've seen, it's much more common for people to not balance this well and to prioritize the status quo over accessibility. I get it. The status quo is powerful. It's really hard to change. But I'm hoping to change that with my series, and my whole presentation training program is about showing you that it's actually really fun and easy to create visually engaging. So hopefully we can change that, and in the next video we'll talk more about this, and we'll talk about where visually engaging went. But I think that's plenty for this video, and I really just want more people to see that when we say, yeah, it's boring but accessible, it's actually kind of saying that people with disabilities aren't really worth the time it takes to create something engaging, and that boring presentations are kind of like the lowest possible standards that we can have. It's like giving up and lowering our standards for inclusion and impact. And I know that might sound harsh if you've said this before, and you probably did say it with good intentions, but what do we say about intentions versus outcomes, right? So to recap, the status quo is inaccessible, like really, really inaccessible. And this video was maybe, hopefully, a wake-up call to that, because when you look at the best practices and evidence-based ways to share information in accessible ways, no one who's really reputable is out there saying, create boring status quo all-text presentations. In fact, they're saying the opposite. They say, don't be boring, be engaging instead. And it's really important to be clear and specific about what you mean when you say these slides are accessible, because people often equate that with a very, very tiny specific subset of just one disability at a time. Yet people can have multiple disabilities at one time, and when you hyper-focus on one, you risk excluding and making it inaccessible for every other disability, and even people without disabilities. And worse, even when you are trying to make something accessible for like one really tiny subset, well, as we learned in this video, that's not even being accomplished. Because at the end of the day, it's still not acceptable to create boring, text-heavy, status quo presentations under the guise of accessibility. The whole, it's boring but acceptable, is not inclusion. It's giving up and lowering our standards for inclusion and impact. We can do so much better than this. And if you're still here watching, that fills me with joy and gives me hope. Thank you for sticking around for this video. I know some of it might have been hard to hear. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that I train academics and researchers and those who went the non-academic path how to create visually engaging presentations. And like I said, people who implement my strategies here, sometimes for the first time, from their audience, that they felt it was an accessible, engaging presentation that they loved. So if you want to create an accessible, visually engaging presentation, for real this time, be sure to check out my training program. I hope to see you in there one day soon. In the meantime, like I said, this is a complex, nuanced topic. I've pasted a bunch of links below, so be sure to check out the description box for that. And I have several more videos to create and share about this. We're going to tackle that next assumption in the next video. So we're going to talk about how visually engaging presentations are accessible, plus more. So stay tuned and let me know what questions you have about accessibility in the context of slide presentations. And I'll see if I can incorporate that into my future videos. And by the way, this whole video was just a PowerPoint presentation. Yep, no fancy software required. I just have Microsoft 365 for home and office. That's it. So again, death by PowerPoint, inaccessible, boring status quo presentations, that's not PowerPoint's fault. Ineffective, inaccessible presentations happen because of a lack of adequate training in presentation skills. It's not even your fault. Grad schools don't train us on this. That's why I have this online professional development program, so I can help fill that gap. It's a super fun way to learn how to make engaging presentations, and I basically teach you universal design and learning and a bunch of other skills in a way that is fun, blended, and easy to apply. So you can be rest assured that if you take my training, accessibility is just embedded in everything I teach, and that you will create more accessible presentations if you follow the strategies in my course. That's it for today. If you found this video helpful, please hit like, subscribe, click the bell so you get notified. And seriously, if you know someone who's also curious about whether or not the status quo is accessible, be sure to share this video with them. And make sure that you leave a comment and let me know what questions you have for the follow-up videos. All right, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye now.